Welcome to episode 598 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton, and he's Ruri Barlow, and we are chatting some Euros today. Now, Ruri, you were in Germany for the Germany versus Scotland opener for this tournament. So how would you rate that experience of heading over to, I guess, my ancestral homeland, which I did get a chance to go to a few years ago, but not for something as big as the Euros?
It was actually the second game. It was the Cologne game for Scotland, so against Switzerland that I was in Germany for. I was just across the border in the Czech Republic for that first game, which was a good job because after about 10 minutes it was turned into a very upsetting occasion for Scotland fans. Those of you who are viewing on YouTube or can perhaps just hear it in my voice that I am still in recovery mode after a few days in Cologne with, I think the estimates are about 200,000 Scotland fans, but we think it could be potentially more based on just what we saw.
Yeah, most of Scotland was there. I know that it's always interesting. I think the fun part of the international game is getting to see the different, not even cultures. I mean, Europe is Europe, but watching kind of all these different fan bases descend upon these similar areas. And as long as no bad news or things get too ratty or out of control, there's always some fun stuff. And it has been enjoyable to see we'll see the banter between the Italian fans and everybody breaking spaghetti and things like that. I know, obviously, for my Italian listeners, my apologies. But yeah, all the little funny things that happen there and the things that can go viral as well as quickly as things can go viral in a bad way. But all right, let's start actually, instead of Germany, we'll get to them. And unfortunately, there's no Barcelona players on Scotland right now. So we'll have to table that for later. But there's so much action that I've been able to watch most of the things that are pertinent to Barcelona, but I have definitely sat down and I did take in all 90 minutes twice of Spain. So that, I think, is where we begin because the most Barcelona players there. And I think one of the talk of the tournaments, of course, is Lamine Yamal against Croatia for the first match. We'll break this down as Croatia, then it was Italy. So in that game against Croatia, going up against Man City's Gvardiol, who does play at center back, but does play as an outside back for Croatia. And another record for him, youngest player in Euros history, 16 years, 338 days, again, making him the youngest player in Euros history, which, while the Euros hasn't been around as long as the World Cup has, it's still quite an honor, quite a big deal, because again, against your for an international record like that, that means you're not only going, competing with the other players in the academy or the players in your 25-person squad, you're competing with all the other Spanish players eligible for the national team. And yet, not only is he selected, but he's selected to start. And we kind of got the idea that was coming. But did you get a sense of people you talked about, Lamine Yamal, that, of course, he plays for Barcelona, so it felt like everyone already knew who Lamine Yamal was, but there is something different about now it's time for him to be a major figure in an international tournament. And he's not only, been up to it. It's not like he's been named to the bench. He's starting and has been important for Spain now in 2 matches. Do you get the sense for the people you've talked to that, not only has he arrived, but he's already very much here? And is it possible for his buzz to have increased since his time with Barcelona during the season?
Yeah, certainly. I think so. I think people obviously watch the Champions League, they watch the club game, but people get into the Euros. It's something that they watch kind of religiously for a month. I think it's quite often at times when people are working and can have it on in the background, or just after when they go to the pub or bars or whatever it is that people like to do in the evenings. And so, yeah, I think you get more of a collective experience in terms of the Euros, as perhaps you maybe get with club football, especially in La Liga or even the Champions League at times. So I feel like there is certainly a next stage to Lamine Yamal announcing himself, and yeah, people have been in touch with me asking about him or just saying how good he is, basically. And yeah, when you do it for your national team, I think it's something that goes a little bit beyond, because club football is so geared towards marketing these players, and we're so geared towards kind of propping them up. There's this new guy on the scene, he's playing for Barcelona, but admittedly there's a lot of players that come out of Barcelona. I mean, Isaac Cuenca, Christian Teo for the veterans of the cause, and yeah, those players come out. But once you start doing it for Spain and you're being capped for Spain, that does take you to a different level in my view. And I mean, Yamal has, as he has with every single stage of his development, shown absolutely no sign of nerves.
Well, there's 2 parts to this. I think as it gets into a broader discussion about Spain and their tactics and things like that. Because when we're talking about Lamine Yamal and so far what he's done with Spain, we immediately have to mention Pedri and Nico Williams as well. So this is kind of a broader idea, but for just going through some of the highlights here, if you haven't been able to watch, Spain's first attempt at the tournament against Croatia came on a press that Lamine Yamal hit a pass with the outside of his boot to Morata, who had dropped deeper for the long shot. He also, I think most importantly, over the course of that Croatia game, he was the outlet when Spain would turn over Croatia because Croatia was susceptible to being pressed, being turned over in their half of the field in a way that we're going to get to Italy in a second here. But then the second goal against Croatia, a long ball out of a numerical advantage on the left side from a throw-in from Fabian Ruiz, him whipping it over to Lamine Yamal, who was in space. And then the initial cross was blocked, gets it right back, and then he moved it onto Pedri, who then set up Fabian Ruiz for the shot, though it must be mentioned, Ruiz still had a ton to do. He had to cut it back, get enough power on it. But the Barca players, while they can hardly be credited with too much of the goal, they were the ones with their fingerprints all over it in Lamine Yamal and Pedri. And then the third goal, it would have been enjoyable to just watch Lamine Yamal work with Dani Carvajal, who just happens to be, obviously, as you know, pure evil in every body, of course, you know that. But this is really interesting to me. The assist for the Real Madrid man from Lamine Yamal was the first Barcelona-Real Madrid-Spain connection in a Euro since 1964, which I guess it's not that crazy, but I was, with Raul being around for so long, and I'm just checking out his Spain caps here. It feels like and 44 goals, 102 appearances. And I guess thinking back, it makes sense with Fernando Torres and David Villa being the consummate starters in those periods when Xavi and Iniesta were delivering the largest number of their assists. So I guess it's possible, but still, Barcelona Real Madrid, a connection since 1964. That was pretty incredible. And it happens off a corner. Lamine Yamal and Nico Williams playing short, and then a terrific ball at the near post from the 16-year-old just before halftime. And then at that point, Spain had kind of run away from Croatia there. And of course, pretty interesting, too, that at the end of that game, he was the one who stayed on when Pedri and Nico Williams both came off, because of course he did, because no manager knows how to substitute Lamine Yamal off before the 60th minute. But yeah, overall, just against Croatia, and then we'll talk about Italy in a second. But it seemed like a credit to De La Fuente that they had a game plan with Lamine Yamal, just trusting that this kid was so dangerous in space that if they were going to press, the look was to immediately switch play and then get him in space against Croatia, which is very similar to what Barcelona knows how to do. But as a broader thing, Spain does have Rodri. And if there's one thing that I saw from Lamine Yamal is that kid would benefit from an actual, yes, I think Rodri is the best in the world at his position, but a actual defensive midfielder that is going to turn the ball over in high spaces and get him the ball right to feet in space, or just in front of him into space, not necessarily ball 2 feet where it comes behind him as it often does for club.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, another part of that operative that you put in there, and perhaps something that Barcelona fans would wish to see, is the fact that you have Nico Williams on the other side, and being able to have two players that can go at their markers, that have such pace, that have such an ability to use that space. It really makes the defence think about things differently. Whereas if you do have kind of a one-sided, say, for example, as Barcelona have had in the past, Gavi on that left-hand side, the right back can cheat a little bit. They can come inside, you can shift the defence across a little bit, but having those two split completely wide, it does stretch the defence quite a lot. And it may be more to do with kind of the Italy game now as well, and the way that they performed in that match. Spain, these two are being talked about, Williams and Lamine Yamal, as the two for Spain, the difference makers, the Spain of Lamine Yamal and Nico Williams, which it goes to show just how much of an impact they've had. And I think it is probably the biggest difference between what Luis Enrique had at the World Cup, where Spain struggled so much against the deep block, and they've not really faced a proper deep block yet. So let's keep our gunpowder dry on that one until we declare Luis de la Fuente this genius. But yeah, the fact that Nico Williams has developed so much in the last couple of years, Lamine Yamal has obviously burst onto the scene. But yeah, Barcelona definitely do have a lot of reasons to be happy with their contributions to the Spain squad. But also, it's kind of interesting in one sense, because in terms of Real Madrid and Barcelona, it's probably the least impact or the least amount of players that they've had in the Spain squad or Spain starting 11 for quite some time. And and you see that with kind of Gavi being out for Barcelona. Balde was there at the last World Cup. Real Madrid, we know it's Nacho and Carvajal, the veterans. There's nobody really else kind of coming through for them. So yeah, it is very interesting to note that this Spain side that potentially could be the most successful in some time is perhaps the least influenced by Real Madrid and Barcelona.
Well, speaking of Nico Williams, I mean, he's somebody that Barcelona fans, of course, we were talking about him. He's on the wish list, I think, for both the club and for fans, which is that perfect synergy of how often do Kounde agree with who the board seems to be linked to, and we'll see how that goes. But for Nico Williams, I think after Croatia was mixed reviews, he's just 21 for a few more weeks. So a reminder that he's also still so young, and the idea that he's a finished product is a bit unfair. As you said, he can take a player on 1v1, but he also has, as you saw against Croatia, an ability to play in behind, which is good to see. I think where he's, I mean, if you were to compare him to even Rafinha, I don't think his pressing is as advanced as Rafinha is. I think Rafinha is a better presser. And I felt like against Croatia, especially, he was more reactive instead of understanding instinctively where to step and when to push. But Fabian Ruiz, I think, has been really, really good in this tournament, even better than what I've seen from him in the last 2 or 3 seasons of club form. I think he's been really sensational. And both he and Rodri as well have given Pedri the option to have a much, much easier job and to take on so much less responsibility than he does with Barcelona, especially Rodri, as I said. So whenever Spain had to deal with Croatia's pressure, even, it was Ruiz and Rodri who would come to the ball to support the center backs, and Pedri was able to just keep his position farther forward, which I think, as we've heard from Flick and we've heard these little rumblings and rumors, that I'm not, as you and I even talked about the last time you were on, I think Pedri kind of is forced to, based on the things he does well compared to other players for Barcelona, to drop in deeper. And yet we see where I believe we see exactly where Flick would love to play him, as where he plays for Spain, and the impact he's able to have as we kind of transition into talking about Spain and Italy, because it was a bit of deja vu between Nico and Pedri and Lamine Yamal, kind of doing similar things but different performances. Nico Williams and Pedri were the main contributors, we'll say, unlike Lamine Yamal against Italy, where Nico Williams to Pedri at the start of the game, Donnarumma saved it, I think, more than Pedri missed on the header, and then Pedri pushing it forward and Nico missing a header. Pedri, as I said, much, much more involved against Italy even, and Nico Williams much more dangerous as well, much better against Italy. Because I did, again, see some, critics about Nico Williams, is he really the consistent player that Barcelona would want? And then against Italy, you see, yeah, I mean, if he can do that 70% of the time, that's exactly what you want from a young winger, hitting the crossbar with one. And then Lamine Yamal, I thought, was a bit quieter against Italy, and they were a bit more focused on him. But mostly the attacks were coming through the middle or down the left. And I thought Spain were kind of undeterred by the fact that they were putting more attention to Italy, to the left side to Barcelona's right side, I should say, their left side, because they were able just to go Nico Williams and Pedri through the middle or to the left. And even Lamine Yamal, with more attention, missed just wide in the 60th minute. That could have been a golazo. What a special moment that would have been. And I thought Spain overall was just as confident against Italy as they were against Croatia. Dani Olmo, who was heavily linked with Barcelona again the last few days, not really the best showings from him, but also not getting a lot of time against Croatia. And then Ferran Torres coming in late to both games, kind of showing you what he would do for Barcelona as well, being a sub to press, to work hard, and potentially contribute a goal, potentially not contribute a goal, but kind of come in. And for Fermin Lopez, we always knew it'd be tough for him, but just being named to the squad for him was a success, but a bit too many guys in front of him to be able to get an opportunity for Fermin Lopez. So again, just kind of named to the bench. He's also, a reminder, still so young, so I don't expect to see him, but I mean, he might actually play in this third game now because Spain are already moving on to the knockout rounds after their victories.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of come back to what you're saying about Lamine Yamal and almost curling that into the top corner, it really reminded me in some ways of the game against Mallorca early in the season when he did do that. And he was having one of his perhaps quieter games in that match, but that's the thing with Lamine Yamal. You can rely on a little bit of magic every now and then. And even if he's not necessarily playing so well, he still makes the right decisions, and he's not when Lamine Yamal's not playing well or not being as good as he has been all the time, to put it more accurately, it's not a real kind of a burden on the team. It's not like you notice him as a problem issue for the side. So yeah, he was still very good against Italy, we should say. I think in terms of Fermin Lopez could get a chance in this last game. I think if you want to talk about players who've done themselves favours who are linked for Barcelona, Ayotte Perez, who There was a small links to him recently, and if Barcelona basically can't afford to go inside the sign the left-sided player they want, Ayotte is doing himself no harm in his Spain performances. But yeah, I think in general it's promising signs from Pedri. He missed two really gilt-edged chances against Italy. I think you have to be scoring them for me, but the fact that he's in those positions, the fact that he looks kind of calm and confident, and he said that he's over his injury, and you never quite believe it until you see it over kind of 5-6 months. But he's definitely improving. He's getting sharper, and he's looking dangerous, which is not something we could say for Pedri of this season as a whole, because yeah, he has been in and outside of injuries. When he's been in the side, he's been playing in a stretch team, as we said, deeper. It's not gone right for him at Barcelona this season, but you saw this is a kind of reminder, a punctual reminder of just how good he can be.
Well, I think moving over to the Germany stuff, it is interesting to see Gundogan work with Musiala, because while Musiala and Pedri are different players, it's kind of interesting to note if Flick were able to replicate some of what's happening with that, because especially against Hungary, where Ilkay Gundogan was the man of the match. Now, he did get fouled for the PK against Scotland, but that one felt like Scotland were obviously completely overmatched by the host country, and Germany kind of just took it to him. So, of course, Gundogan had a good match, but so did everybody for Germany, because there was so much, not even space, but they found the space. They cut Scotland open, and they were just better all around quality. So, yes, if you have that much more quality than your opposition, then good things are going to happen. But against Hungary, who was a bit more disciplined than Scotland were, he with the man of the match performance, he assisted on the Musiala goal for the opener, really did most of the work and got Musiala open for that. And then he was found with a square ball in the box for the second goal. And, I think the argument that heading into the Flick era that we're going to have, and I think because of Pedri's injuries, we didn't really have as much as we could have last season, because of, and Gabi's injury going down as well. But I said, there is a successful path, as Robert Frost said, two roads diverge in the wood or at the Camp Nou. And there's one where Gundogan and Pedri are redundant in where they need to be, and then that leaves Barcelona wide open for counterattacks and issues there, and the press doesn't get off, and it's not successful the way that we've seen Germany and Spain. Again, both their presses have looked really good because they have the right personnel to turn teams over in their half. And again, the argument, no offense to Scotland and Hungary, but the jump from Germany probably down to Scotland and Hungary is a bit more of a jump than it is when Barcelona is playing against a Real Madrid or a PSG, or that it's just not the same. The players are different, the quality is different, and no offense to Italy, but again, the Spain to Croatia, and Croatia in tournaments, international play is different. That's all we're saying. But again, on individual quality, the jump is a little different at times. And if a team isn't in the right way for a tournament, then you can jump on them quickly, as Germany did against Scotland. But even Hungary, I mean, they were in the match. It's not like they were completely blown off the field. But as I said, the two roads here is that Gundogan and Pedri, they do work things out. They do figure it out as to where they need to be up high on the field. And the integration between the two in the spots they need to be is seamless. Again, the way that we're seeing Gundogan and Musiala a bit, and then Pedri as well, pushing high for Spain and pressing and all those things. And then there's the other way where, as I said, it's completely redundant. And Barcelona are wide open in the middle of the field because they don't have the right personnel in rest defense or to set themselves up for the counter. And if anything, watching the Euros, it makes me more nervous, but also more excited. And I'm not sure which of those two to feel, between redundancy and, kind of seeing the best out of both.
Yeah, I think it will come down to what business Barcelona can or are able to do. And if you look at both of those cases, I think Pedri and Gundogan more or less play that same role. And I mean, you talk about combining with Musiala, but Musiala is the one starting wider there of Gundogan, with Gundogan in the middle. And then if you look at the way that with Spain, obviously Pedri is the kind of number 10 in inverted commas there. And for Barcelona, can you drop one of them deeper? Well, look at that Germany side. You've got Robert Andrich, who's basically there to shut things down, to get in and about, to really be physical with the opposition. And Toni Kroos, who is perhaps the best manipulator of the ball in midfield in the world right now. You look at Spain, you've got Rodri, who, again, another discussion for best midfielder in the world. And you've got Fabian Ruiz, and perhaps it's more interesting to talk about Mikel Merino in that sense, with Barcelona linked with him too. But physical players, players that can put themselves about, that know exactly where to be. And so, can you find a combination of those two at the same time that works? Maybe you push one of them wide, but then you're starting to impact on kind of the rest of the shape. And I think it's a huge question for Flick to answer, and it's something that's been spoken about ad nauseum between ourselves, but in general with Barcelona, that balance in midfield. How do you find it? Do you have players that can play in a 4-2-3-1 without dropping one of Pedri, Gundogan, especially De Jong? Gavi is another one you can add into that mix as well. There's so many that you've got there that play in kind of similar roles, or at least similar parts of the park, and yeah, finding the right kind of balance of profiles. Because I think one thing that international football really illustrates, because you don't have that ability to go out and transfer a player to bring somebody in a certain position, is balance. Sometimes you're better off having a more balanced side than the most talented players on the pitch, and yeah, that's going to be the conundrum for Flick: is how much do I want to fade towards talent, or how much do I want to make sure this is a balanced side?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to. England has already taken their lumps, so I don't mean to heap on them. But you talk about Southgate seems not to be doing either of those because he's not putting his most talented players on the field, but he's also not finding the right balance either. And somehow, I knew English pundits, of course, were going to be frustrated no matter what, unless they won every game 7-0. But the kind of transitions us into quickly talking about Andreas Christensen, because he's having a pretty good tournament. I mean, he played well enough against Slovenia, but Denmark kind of underachieved, it felt like, in that game. And then he led the back line against England, where England looked like it should have been a rout once that first goal was scored. But then, I mean, I don't know if it says more about Denmark than it does about England, but the way that England decided to sit back and just kind of absorb pressure was just silly. It felt like nonsense to me at the time. And I mean, the pundits said it, everyone. I mean, of course, again, the English media is going to disagree with everything that Southgate does, unless he wins 7-0. But yeah, I mean, they just felt like England completely bottled that result. And then Denmark get their goal. I mean, a pretty great goal, too. And then just kind of nursed down the clock in 90, and then it was 1-1. But yeah, for Christensen, really interesting because he's a major figure for Denmark, but Denmark kind of play the role in these tournaments that Christensen does play for Barcelona, where you kind of forget about him, and then you look at the result and you're like, oh, Denmark, they drew with Slovenia, sure, but then they also drew with England, and they have a chance to make the knockouts. And then when they're in the knockouts, you're going to feel like they're the underdog there. But that's kind of Christensen's story. That is he vital to Barcelona? No, but also without him, you're like, well, there's something missing here, and it'd be great to have him around. And I don't know, it just feels like Christensen with Denmark is, again, even as a key figure, Denmark as a whole, just again, it feels like the same thing we talk about with his role at Barcelona.
Yeah, I feel like even the Spanish media were almost more critical of Gareth Southgate than the English media. There was one that said that it was England have one of the most talented teams, but Southgate, and there was another one that said, "What would Pep Guardiola think? England disappointing again," that kind of thing. So yeah, it basically goes to show you that there's no sympathy for him abroad either. But coming on to kind of Christensen, yeah, I mean, he's one of those players that, yeah, you don't notice him. And to be honest, you don't really want to notice your centre-backs too much, in my view. Pau Kubasi is perhaps the exception for that, because he is so fantastic on the ball that you do notice it come out. And then Ronald Araujo, in kind of the opposite fashion, he fixes so many things, or he puts in so many big challenges that you do notice him. But perhaps with Araujo, it's more of a symptom of issues that you notice him so much, whereas with Kubasi, it's more of a symptom of his quality. I think with Christensen, he's never, because of his age, because of the doubts about him at Chelsea, and he was never a guaranteed starter. I think he's always going to find it difficult to have that confidence of the fans and of the media that he is that number one player. Even if I think, I want to say against Slovenia, and maybe I'm mixing him up with someone else, but I don't think he missed a pass against Slovenia. I think he was 100% or close to. So yeah, he's neat and tidy. He's good. If you have a good system, as we saw with Barcelona last season, he's great. He's really, really good. He's really comfortable, and he is kind of one of those glue players that if you stick him in, he will do his job and make sure you have enough around him. He'll be absolutely fine. If you don't, that's when he starts to get stretched, and yeah, so he's one of those players that you think, oh, maybe he doesn't have the quality, but he's one of those, yeah, kind of equilibrium players. If you've not got that balance, he starts to struggle. If you do, then he looks really, really great.
And he is playing center back for Denmark. And a reminder, I always have to keep reminding myself that he did finish the season as a pivot under Xavi. And of course, as I've just been saying, a pivot would be number one on the list of things to do. But then if you move him back to center back, you've got a lot of center backs. That said, I do find the discourse around who Barcelona will play at right back, and you always say, oh, they've got Cancelo and this idea, but then it seems like people keep forgetting Jules Kounde. But if there's anything I learned from watching Spain against Austria, is that Jules Kounde is still a right back, and he is going to be a right back. And for as bad as Barcelona's defense was this past season compared to the year before, Jules Kounde was actually better this past season than the year before. And he just did well, and he's a right back, and that is what he is now. And if he doesn't want to play right back, then he's going to ask for a transfer. But it seems like even under Flick, that's going to be the position he plays. It makes sense with Flick's system as well. We saw the role that Pavard played, and while Kounde doesn't have the same attacking acumen as Pavard, I think he's just a better player. He's a better defender, and he's better in his positioning than Pavard is. There's a reason why Bayern Munich didn't want to keep him around and why he decided to exit. So we'd like to say more about Kounde, but also Netherlands play France later today. So by the time you're likely hearing this or seeing this, I mean, maybe he completely bottled it, or maybe he was Deschamps surprisingly started him at center back, but likely he's going to be at right back, and likely he's going to be a pretty consistent presence for France. And all the attention is, of course, on Mbappe and his mask instead of on Kounde, of course. So I don't know. I have nothing really to add for Kounde, because what I saw against Austria was just Jules Kounde for Barcelona is Jules Kounde for France. And again, that's a good thing for those who are shipping him to continue to be the right back.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Kounde is an interesting one because in theory, Flick does like fullbacks that bomb on and get beyond, but you're going to have a slightly more defensive presence. And if we learn from Cancelo, it's that neither Guardiola nor Xavi really ever trusted him in that right back slot to defend well. And I think most pertinently, you saw that in the Classico, where he lined Cancelo up as kind of a part of a five or a front three, depending on where you found him at any one time. But yeah, he can't fill that right back slot, and maybe he fills in the left back slot because they don't have any other options. But yeah, Kounde is a much more solid and reliable one. And if you're a manager, you're looking for kind of, right, who can I rely on? Who do I know is going to give me performances? Kounde is far further ahead in terms of defensively what he will give you than Cancelo. Now, Barcelona will play 70% of their season against teams that they are expected to win against and expected to dominate the ball against. So maybe you do see Cancelo there for those games. But overall, yeah, I mean, Kounde is a much more reliable option at this point. And yeah, I think Cancelo, he can be useful, but people have to disassociate him from the idea of that he is a pure fullback. He's either a fullback, I think, in a five, or he can play further forward. My bet, depending on what the finances are doing and what else you can bring in, would be to play him at left wing. I think that's where you probably get the most out of him if you're Barcelona. But yes, it's hard to find a place for a footballer that doesn't necessarily have a natural fit in what we assume is going to be quite a structured 4-2-3-1 in terms of where the players play, where the players go. But you never know. I mean, Flick has had a lot of time to think as well. From his Germany side, from his Bayern side, he won't have the same pieces. So we might see something a little bit more fluid or flexible than we're used to.
Well, fortunately, Roberto Martinez made my job easier because I don't have to talk about João Felix because he did not get off the bench against Czechia. So that's simple there. And whether or not João Felix will be returning to Barcelona, seems like he will. Again, I want to talk about the dissonance between what the Culés and fans seem to want and what the board seems to want to do, or at least what Jorge Mendes wants to do for Barcelona. That's different. But Cancelo, it seems like he will be back, whether it's on loan or one of those, like a loan with you have to buy, a mandate to buy in the summertime for 2025. Seems like Cancelo will be back. And it is interesting you bring it up because he basically, against Czechia, played as a left midfielder in a 3-4-3, which, again, we know that Hansi Flick is likely going to play that 4-2-3-1. That's likely what's going to happen. But then if you want to fit Cancelo in there and not have him just be an auxiliary piece, then, I mean, unless he is why would you have him as a left center, the left back in that 4-2-3-1? But again, crazier things are happen because if Balde doesn't come back fully healthy or can't find his form and Cancelo's a little bit better and you're having Kounde on the other side, then yeah, I mean, I guess maybe it makes sense to continue to have Cancelo as your left back in that system. But I think Cancelo is certainly not a right back. If anything, he'll be in front of in front of Kounde, but then where you're going to fit, obviously, Lamine Yamal is the consummate starter there. And there's different options you can do, but it is interesting to see that for Portugal, and yes, this is also the personnel because Nuno Mendes is going to start, Rafael Leao is going to start, and as you kind of just said, that you do want to start a system more than you want to start the best players or the best individual players. But clearly, Roberto Martinez wants to try to put his more talented players on the field. Now, again, João Felix didn't even see the field. That kind of tells you something about where he is on their depth chart. And also, he does continue to throw Cristiano Ronaldo out there. So I don't know. I think Roberto Martinez, having seen that game against Czechia, he has some issues in Portugal, clearly not at their best. But I don't think Cancelo is necessarily a part of the problem as more as he is kind of part of their solution. Again, but that said, could he play where Rafael Leao is going to start? No, Leao is a starter, but you do want to see Cancelo on the field. It's a matter of where you put him, and then the other personnel and other options means if you're going to do that 3-4-3 to kind of support some of your better players, then there's not necessarily a natural fit for him, and yet he's just fine as a left midfielder. But again, I don't think there's anything from his performance for Portugal that I could possibly want to deliver and carry over to what Flick would use him for with Barcelona.
Yeah, no, I can't say. I think it will probably have very little bearing, his performances actually, for Barcelona or Portugal, on what happens this summer. As you say, Jorge Mendes is likely to have the kind of last say on that, and rightly or wrongly. But yeah, this is the hole that Barcelona have got themselves into with Jorge Mendes, and yeah, these players they can be useful, and yeah, listen, if Flick can do what no manager before has done and get a kind of consistent tune out of them, excepting perhaps Pep Guardiola with Cancelo for a stage, then yeah, you will have useful players on your hands. And I think João Felix can be, depending on what price he comes back at, he can be kind of a useful forward or kind of option off the bench. But for that, you're going to have to kind of really see expectations lowered about him from his kind of camp in terms of his media machine personal, from Barcelona's media machine personally, and in terms of the way that he sees himself, he's going to have to knuckle down and work a lot harder, because you saw him in some of those games off the bench. He looked really aggressive in the way you kind of want to see him in terms of fighting for a place, and you saw him in other games kind of drift through them, and you saw that from a lot of Barcelona forwards. Let's not beat about the bush, but yeah, you need to see that consistently, and it feels like the low kind of bar for Ferran Torres is he works very hard, he presses, and maybe doesn't score the goal, but he will at least kind of be in and about the defence, causing issues. For João Felix, that the bottom of that bar, the basement of his kind of level, is really, really low if he's not into a game. It can be really, really high as well, but again, you're looking at it from the point of view as a manager. Am I going to risk my job security in some cases on João Felix? Yeah, maybe if I need a wonder goal in 10 minutes, or if I'm starting somebody against Getafe away from home, it's probably going to be Ferran Torres because I know what I'm getting from him.
Well, unfortunately, because we've gone through the players at the Euros, we don't really have much other time. We didn't have time to talk about Turkey against Georgia. We didn't have time to talk about Romania. We didn't have time to talk about Albania and what they've done, interestingly enough, in this tournament. So, yeah, I mean, there's still so much action to go. It was kind of naive, I think, to do this, before as we're going through the second and third group stage games. But also starting last night was a Copa America. So I don't even think we have a moment to talk about that. Now, obviously, the USA are playing in that one. Mexico are playing in that one. And Brazil, so Rafinha on Monday. And then Sunday is Ronald Araujo with Uruguay. And, I mean, Ruri, I'm going to open up the floor to you to kind of give the final point here between the Euros and obviously your Europe base. So that's going to be a lot of your attention. And also the times for the Copa America are going to be really tough for you. So, God bless you on that one. But, if you're able to see some of this stuff, I mean, with this summer of football, what are you looking for in the Copa America? What are you excited for in the Euros here in the next few weeks? And again, the floor is yours, not about Barcelona, just in general.
Yeah, in general, well, I think Scotland has to be the main focus for me because this is a national event.
You got one
This
more
is
match to kind of soak it in and enjoy.
Yeah, Sunday against Hungary. If we get through, be ready for the mother of all parties. But yeah, so that's one thing I'll be keeping an eye on. I think with the Euros, it will get very exciting once it gets to the quarter-final stage. But these kind of last group games will come into the final round very shortly as well. Will be fun because there'll be so much on the line for nations that you don't necessarily see, and you see the big travelling supports that you won't see from Spain or Italy or England. You will see it, but perhaps not in the way you want to always. But France, it doesn't matter to France too much if they win. They'll be delighted, of course, but for the likes of a Hungary or a lesser in inverted commas nation of Slovakia, if they get through, you will
Mhm.
see something kind of unique and different for those countries. In terms of actual football itself, Uruguay is the one I'm going to be taking time out of my sleeping pattern to watch because Marcelo Bielsa has them playing some really good football. They beat Brazil and Argentina in the last year. They look really, really good. You've got players like Fede Valverde and Araujo who can run harder and faster than all of their opponents pretty much. And if you put that into a Bielsa system, then it gets really quite exciting. So yeah, tune into Uruguay would be my tip for the summer.
Well, I did promise you the last word, but I completely forgot to mention that Robert Lewandowski, because he missed Poland's first game against the Netherlands, he either played or didn't play by the time you're hearing this against Austria. But for Lewandowski, we know exactly who he is. We know exactly what he's supposed to do for Poland. So I think I'm not too worried about whether he played or not, and we'll see if Poland can even get past. And yeah, as you mentioned, with the Copa America going on, there's a lot of important games to be done, and Uruguay is one to watch. And there's so many different talking points and things like that to go over. It's hard to kind of keep it all together. Yeah, and I'm sorry. Yeah, Scotland, with the anticipation that they were already out, they're not already out. And I guess the last thing I'll mention to you is that there were worries that the talent would be diluted with the expanded number of teams in the Euro, as well as for Copa America, adding the CONCACAF teams in Jamaica and the United States and Mexico, which they have been in the past, but in particular here in the Copa America, you're seeing, that trio being added to this group, and it's not just South American teams. So it, for as many matches, it seems like, and as many new teams that there are, it seems like the matches have not been diluted, which, I mean, it's bad for the footballers who don't want to play a million games per year, but again, it is good for the expanded teams and expanded countries that are getting to see their national teams, which again is always kind of the point of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think as much as I am very much anti more games and anti kind of FIFA bringing in the Club World Cup, which is a mindless exercise of money, expanding that to 32 teams, this is actually where you do see more teams get a shot. And you'll see four more teams in the Champions League next season, four more group games, but the majority of those teams will come from your big leagues, and you won't see kind of an opportunity for teams of or fans of smaller teams or fans of big supports that aren't used to this getting the chance. So in this case, I will give you a free pass. But maybe that's just because I'm Scottish and I'm still in it. So
Yeah, I mean, also you and I complaining about FIFA here on this podcast, very little does that change. I think it's
yes, constant.
FIFA's busy fighting Interpol and the CIA and things like that. Anyway, all right, before we get into international politics here again, Rory, you can read all his stuff as you do on Football España. So thank you so much, Rory, for joining me on the show. And as always, we're in the summer months. So, for those who are checked out of the Barcelona stuff, next week, as the plan is going to be the deep dive for La Masia because of the playoff promotions going on. So hopefully that's next week. If that's a promise, it is going to happen eventually. Again, the kids aren't going anywhere. I mean, a bunch of them are leaving the club, so it's difficult keep pace on that, and who knows who's going to arrive. But in the meantime, Patreons, thanks so much for always helping me continue to make shows, especially in the summertime when people have tuned out. Twitter, Instagram. You can also find him at Twitter down in the show notes below at Ruri Barlow. And then closed Facebook group, Discord. That's where the community is. I also have to plug things in the future that are supposed to be secrets. I do have some fun things that I've been working on having meetings about. Let's put it that way. It's so cool that we're actually having meetings on those kind of things. So most importantly, though, thanks so much for listening to the show. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. And Forza Barca.